So welcome everyone. This is our, I don't know, second or third Community Weavers online exploration that we're hosting in this format. My name is Jonathan. I think all of you know me, so I don't need to introduce myself much more. And I'm happy to host these spaces with Alexandra, who I've met, I think, last year in Costa Rica, and we've been working on all things around community and human development. So yeah, I'll also briefly hand it over to you, Alex, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alex. I run a company called Entelechy, and basically what it is a place to explore what brings us together. And a lot of, for me, like, community is really based on us being able to be in interdependence with each other. And there's so much that goes into that, as far as like our own mental models, empathy, the way we relate to the earth. And so I work with individuals and groups to kind of help bring us back into interdependence, knowing that it's this lifelong, perhaps intergenerational journey. So yeah, nice to be here with you all. And I'm also in Costa Rica and Chiripo.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, and I'm calling in from Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, in the beautiful Starry Mountain hotel here, or guest house, however you want to call it, community, sort of. And there's a bit of background noise, so I'll mute myself when I'm not speaking. I hope it'll be all right in terms of quality. Yeah, and we host these community viewer online explorations more from a place of being in the questions together. So instead of having the perfect answers and having the experts who tell us how to do things, we're exploring together and really also inviting the experts who bring a lot of knowledge and expertise to also bring their questions and the things where they haven't completed their quest and their inquiry into community yet. And so today we're really excited to have Ticon with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Ticon, and maybe you also want to introduce and present yourself to kick off this call, just for everyone to be aware we're recording this call so that we can share it with more people as well who couldn't make it on time today. And so this is our way to share it more publicly also with the world, because we believe that this message is really important and these conversations are really important for more people to receive them. So without further ado, welcome, Ticon. Thank you so much for being with us today.
How's everybody going? Can you hear me all right? Awesome. Yeah, I've formerly been known as Ticon for a long time, and currently I go by Ticon. It's actually a original Cherokee name. And I'm the co-creator of Thinkomorpho and also the open source nomadic community model. Right now I'm here in Fuente Verde, beautiful Fuente Verde in Tinamase, Costa Rica. And I'm super excited to share because I love to talk about this journey and the journey to community and the journey to sustainability. It is super exciting for me. And we have, just to start, I think one of the things that I always like to ask myself in every situation is, what is my objective? And if I'm clear on what I'm trying to accomplish, then it's very clear on what steps I need to take. And when it came to community, the whole community started from the objective of sustainability, wanting to live in harmony with nature. And that led through the whole journey of creating the nomadic community model. So I'd like to see, just ponder in each one of our inquiries, what is our objective to understand, and what are we trying to glimpse the kernel from?
Yeah, for me, it's super interesting that you evolved from like Thinkomorpho, which is a land-based model, to this global nomadic community. And I'd love to hear what that evolution was like and what sparked it.
Well, when I first moved to Costa Rica, I was actually doing it from this deep inner soul calling. It was the first time I ever listened to some subtle intuition. I was actually in a very, very depressed place, and I lived in the States, even though I had physically quite an abundant life. And when I moved to Costa Rica, we bought the property on the internet without ever seeing it. And so it was like this big kind of leap of faith. And when I moved there, I didn't have any friends. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have a plan at all. The only plan I had was grow organic food. And this led me through this pathway of putting myself on the edge of my comfort zone and seeing a whole new world of myself and personal growth. And from that, I found permaculture. The land of Finca Morpho was originally, it was dying. It was going through desertification. So every dry season, everything would turn brown, like so dead that you could light it with a match as a wildfire. And at first, everything I planted didn't work. And I was like, this is the worst thing ever. I just dropped a bunch of money and I can't grow organic food. And then the universe was like, yeah, like, well, you know that there's a system out there and you just follow it and things grow. And then I found that, in nature, there's so many niches, there's so many plants, there's so much biodiversity, and that there's plants called pioneering species. And it just led me down this whole rabbit hole of allowing myself to live on the edge of my comfort through the process that allowed for a rapid amount of information and experiences to happen that really gave me what I feel to be a very holistic understanding of what I was trying to accomplish. And the nomadic community was always intended to be an open source model. It was created at Finca Morpho, but we always shared it with wherever we went. And actually, Jason is on the call right here, right? So the model started at his farm. We didn't start it. We just picked it up. He started it at Finca Fruition before we started Finca Morpho. And then when we started Finca Morpho, we talked to him and other people who was at his farm, and we're like, what worked? What didn't work? What paperwork do you have? And what can we use? And that's how the tree model got expanded, which was birthed either at his place or somewhere before in the ether. And we continue to evolve this model, which now I feel very comfortable in. And what ultimately led to the end of Morpho was just a big life change and a separation of myself with my partner. But it has also brought forward my ability to now service all these communities that are taking on the model. And from our conversation today, I feel we'll all see the depth of transition that we're undertaking as we go from one identity, one cultural identity to another, and how big of a journey that really can be. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for giving us that introduction and overview of some of the things that you're doing. And from the conversations that we had, I know that the nomadic community blueprint, I would almost say, isn't something that is so much focused on the outer structures, but mostly also focuses on the inner structures that are enabling us to actually live in community and to move in that transition that some people might call game A to game B, of really moving to cooperation, of really moving through to interconnectedness from a place of separation and competition, and really embodying that trust and that love that is necessary to align with a higher purpose and to co-create from that place. So I'd be curious to hear a little more of what is the objective that you also spoke about. What is the question that nomadic communities is attempting to answer? You want to deepen that a little, and also where you are with that. What is the edge?
Yeah, you tapped into it a little bit there with this word love. And as we got into just growing, and we started the community part, we realized there's this relationship thing, humans relating. And then concept of love came up, and it became very apparent that there wasn't an understanding of the complexities of our emotions, our relationships, or more specifically, this energy or force called love, and that we could feel intuitively that it was a fundamental part of our human experience. We even created a model of goals, love and shelter, and we call it the only human needs. And everything else is a desire, it's a want. And so what kind of played forward is we really have a picture of a later model, which I'll talk about from the Anastasia books, but we felt individually that our emotional sovereignty and independence was so far away from being able to believe that we could be this thing, mainly because me and the other creators, we didn't quite understand the complexities of these relationships, what love was, and ultimately what we are as human beings and what the world is. And then we started to really think, as like, if we can't maintain a relationship between us, then the farm can't go forward. Like, that's the limiting factor. A farm or a community is based on the relationships. And in that, the relationships started to start this process to go deeper into this what am I, which we were talking about a little bit in the pre-call about, you know, am I me? Am I Ticon? I'm this body? Like, it just starts to get really deep in spirituality and philosophy. And when we were trying to make, like, you know, an actual or normal, what normal people thought a community was, we just saw that each one of these knowings about ourselves and love and the world stood in the way from creating a working model. And all this came from studying permaculture in observe and interact, obtain a yield, and using the permaculture principles to interact not only with forming community, but also with forming these understandings about the true essence of our nature and the true essence of love. And so it summarizes in that, how could we ever hope to design a permanent culture, a system sufficient enough to last forever, if we don't understand the foundations of our experience? We don't understand love, a need that we have, and who we are, then the probability of creating a successful system is very little. So the point of nomadic community is to serve as a space, a physical space, but also a time space, so that people actually have time to have webcam calls and to read books and to connect with other humans and to do processing internally, which we saw was the limiting factor to this transition. If you look outside in the normal world or Babylon or whatever we're going to call it, most people are stuck in the 9 to 5. They're tired, they sleep, and they repeat. They don't have the time to go deep into this conversation and to watch a video or one of 300 videos that we could talk about in this call. And so they don't have the space to see that. And so the whole point of nomadic community is to create the spaces that have no other objective but to make sure that the plan is effective enough to hold water, air, food, love, and shelter for at least 5 to 7 years. And in that 5 to 7 years, a unique thing happens. Authentic people begin to gain authentic power. And what we call the flow or synchronicity starts to stack and gain. And that site starts to draw in all kinds of unexpected factors, income, resources, and information that site can then make a permanent plan for how that site is going to maintain its energy. Because when we say community at any level, each one of the community needs a physical location. That physical location is the binding factor of that community, besides this nomadic one we're farming, being able to survive. And so there has to be somebody who's stewarding those physical responsibilities of how are we actually getting water, who's getting food, who's maintaining our relationships, who's actually going to like make sure that we're treating each other with love and holding us accountable, and who's like paying the mortgage or building the house. And once those 5 things are settled, then authentic time can be given, which we could equate to love as well. And through that, people can grow. And the growth is uncalculable and takes people in a totally unexpected route. Yeah, I hope that covers all the points.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, like, wow, that just like started making all these like clicks in my mind, because I mean, if we look at like agriculture and place-based societies, historically those were actually like attributed to a lot of like the problems that we're dealing with now. I don't know if you've ever read the book like The Chalice and the Stone, or The Chalice and the Sword, and it was talking about like revisiting the knowledge of like pre-agrarian history, and there's actually a lot of evidence that men and women were living in egalitarian societies in these like nomadic communities. So when you speak of this, like it actually makes me question, like, you know, we have this idea of community now as needing like land and being really like place-based. But, you know, if you zoom out of that and how community was before, when we were completely detached from the concept of like ownership and land, and we still had community and we still supported each other. So how, like this nomadic community, like how do you see it playing out if without the concept of land? And do you think that's creates a new possibility space that land-based communities might not create?
Yeah, to dive in there, the nomadic community model, what it does is it creates a framework of common agreements that eliminate a lot of the stress and struggle of new people coming into the same space and forming agreements, which essentially all has to do with emotional attachment, which we can probably go into in a little bit. So what happens is the nomadic core members, which are these people who are going through this transition through these spaces, when they show up to a space, they're going to bring life and energy to this location and help it crystallize some bit of crystalline light in the space for it to be used in the bigger picture. There's not, in the sense of, you know, a traditional nomadic community, there's not like a group of people who are sticking together and traveling the whole time, as much as it's a framework for people to know what to do. And maybe you know the person, maybe you don't, but you can still work on the same project because you have the same intrinsic motivation to bring regeneration and healing to the world and ultimately to yourself. And yes, like some people start to form little pockets where maybe they travel together and go here and there. And ultimately, it's not for me a question of what's the best kind of community, land-based or moving around, as much as creating the proper space that's going to maximize somebody's potential to transfer their habits into sustainable habits. And knowing that the main boundary in that is actually this emotional landscape that we have normally a very small understanding of its functionality. And so what essentially happens in, like, just use the example right here, I've brought the nomadic community here to Fuente Verde, to my friend Merlin's place, and he's starting a community. He's never done a community before, and we have. So we know all the little details of what he's going to encounter by inviting people into his space. But we also can show him firsthand all the benefits of inviting people into his space and help him create a healthy communication and boundary that both protects his energy, but also allows him to give successfully to people who come to this space, who will ultimately invite the space here, making it more abundant, more permaculture, so that the next people come have more food, and so forth and so on. So really, it's a way for spaces to energetically open up so that they can facilitate more energy. And the more spaces that have open containers, the more people who can come through them and receive that gift of space in a very secure, safe spot among people who actually care and will listen to you and know how to own their emotions from their landscape and not project them. And so from all that, there are many things that will be born. Like I actually think that this is just a step, and I'm imagining and hoping that some people can skip it. But based on what I've seen, just from our culture and TV and domestication, that it has such a grasp that it's so important to have spaces that have freedom. Like openness, and from that, everything else will happen. Does that answer your question fully?
Yeah, and it makes a million more questions. I think you can, well, I think I keep hearing you mention like the emotional sphere, and I'd love to hear like where within that layer you're still questioning, like where are the edges that you're still like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah. In community or in my own personal spiritual evolution?
I think it's the same, right?
You're going deep and intimate on that question right there. I feel super confident as a leader of this space to keep things in harmony. Just because I did it for years and went through like subjects, but essentially through our experiences and our traumas, some of us, most of us, have formed these beliefs, these limiting beliefs. And so when it comes to like where my questioning is the proper boundaries of love, which get very deep. As being a leader in the container, what's within a responsible or appropriate amount of love extension? Where does the line exist? That can get very, very interesting, actually, because in a space, especially as a leader, there's a huge power dynamic, and a culture of traumatized sexual experiences leaves a lot of people in very vulnerable energetic spaces. And so, as a leader, if I was, romantic or even connected or even like too touchy to someone who I was unconscious or there was some bit of unclarity in, it could be, for me, from my own perspective, viewed as me doing something wrong. So I'd put myself down. And then there's a fear of like, oh, other people are going to think I'm doing something wrong. And then there's a fear there as well. And so this goes into whole depth though, because if I was maybe going to flip it around and ask, like most people I ask, what is the difference between a feeling and an emotion and a thought? Like, where is our actual comprehension about how this thing is working? And I find that most people associate the story that they tell themselves from the feeling as the feeling. But from my experience and my observation, those aren't the same thing. That the feeling is not words, it's like a visceral thing, and it can turn into an emotion like anger and sadness. But the thought things, but commonly as a species, it's like, well, what is the difference between those two things? And if we're not sure, especially in a culture, if you have a leader that has a misalignment and they think the story that they tell themselves about their feeling is the truth, then that leader is going to like take control of the energetic environment. And then they're going to start to project their beliefs on everyone else. And that's some of the most imbalancing and destructive things that happen in community, is when the leader is entrusted to like hold the space, and then they project their own essentially traumas onto the space and they believe them to be true. And that's a little bit of the vulnerability and jumping into feelings, which is ultimately the depth of work in the community and for the leaders. The nomadic community has this core program, and it's 5 to 7 years. And the people who come into it, I have them write a 5 to 7 year plan. And I ask them, where are you at emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, financially? And where do you want to be in 5 to 7 years? And how do you see that your acts of service in these containers are going to give you the skills and ability and experience to put your life on the track that you want to be. And I tell them one thing's going to happen for sure. You're going to get upset like 100% of the time. However, like, know that you have now a container of people who care, and with the plethora of emotional tools that you can then to take, and I am asking you to take emotional responsibility, meaning that you try on this idea that all my feelings stem to do with beliefs and ideas about myself. And this is critical for the core members. Of course, like new people, you know, they don't hear this too much, but somebody's going to make this transition 5 to 7 years and be put in a space of leadership, that they have to be willing to tell themselves, maybe this feeling, maybe this story that I'm saying that this person is causing me to feel this way, maybe that's not true. And maybe it actually has something to do with me and how I feel about myself. And that starts a very deep journey. And there's actually the course on miracles has a 6-step process to freedom, and a center here in Costa Rica called El Cielo. And there's also a center called Earth Waking Village, who both do an emotional process that essentially drop into those stories that we tell ourselves that create the deeper, subtle feelings. And often the most common feeling is that I'm not good enough, which is the feeling that started to come up when you asked me if I was like doing it all right. when you asked me the question earlier. So going deep quick, I like this. Does that resonate? That make sense with you?
Oh my God, yeah, totally. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being really vulnerable with that. I resonate with that experience, and I think I've landed in the same place that you're talking about, which is like everything that I feel or I think other people are causing in me is just like, okay, where does that come from within me? But then, yeah, the really just staying with the body feelings and trying to avoid the story of what those mean actually allows them to just flow through. It's when we get caught up in the stories. And I think also one thing you said about the leader being responsible for not putting the traumas on others, I think there's also a level of responsibility for not wanting someone to tell us the truth. Because, you know, the people involved that are looking to the leader for the truth are equally able to take responsibility for themselves, you know. And I think I've experienced sometimes in my work that people want me to be the guru and have the answers, and I think there's this like intrinsic like desire to find answers outside of ourselves. And so when there is someone that has that leadership energy, others tend to kind of look to them, but there's also the responsibility to be discerning of the information that we're receiving from anyone and really trust ourselves as well.
Yeah, you just hit on a huge point right there, in that the leader in the nomadic community in any given situation is the person most immersed in love. If there's conflict in for it, but more than that, it's each person driving their own ship so that they can figure out how they're going to get their ship on that trajectory that they're driving towards. And I definitely resonate with what you said too, because it's much easier to hand off responsibility and be like, well, it's kind of a deep responsibility to figure this out. Why don't you just tell me? And then if you're wrong, then it'll be okay, because at least I'm not wrong. And it brings in a lot. I think in specifically Thinkamorpho, we really wanted to drive in the ability to live super basic, like super basic with nature, but also have like the time of your life. And in an effort to really connect people with their ability to see themselves, that they can have less. And that handing off of the individual responsibility came in a lot, because we told people, if you need more, make more. If you have this feeling that it brings up scarcity and you start trying to convince other people to help you make more or do this, then kind of put awareness to that search of, I need somebody to fulfill it, I need somebody to take care of it, and funnel that energy towards what is it that I want to create, from like dependence to creation. And that was one of the most powerful things that I saw, was a lot of people really switching into to taking care of themselves, like building basic little structures and shelves or anything that they needed that they felt like they didn't have. And that, I feel like, is the ultimate key, is that recapping of our own responsibility for our needs, but also back to what you were saying, to empower people that they can trust their intuition. I think that's the key, is when people ask me like what to do, I most often say, what do you want to do? What does it feel like you want to do? And sometimes, they're not for sure, and you can help them tap into their heart. But most people always know what they want to do. They're just afraid for whatever reason. And so following one's intuition and trusting oneself is at the utmost key of this entire process. 100%.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it resonates a lot with many of the things that I've explored in my work around collective leadership, especially when you said, I'm not sure if I understood it correctly, but what came through was something that the person who is embodying the highest frequency of love should be the one leading the group. And that can shift very dynamically. So there must be, sort of checks and balances, that if we notice that a leader is falling out of love, how do we facilitate that so that someone else takes the lead, that we have a respectful process of sharing feedback of like, oh, I have the feeling you're not in the highest capacity to lead this group. Now let's shift leadership to someone else who is more embodying this quality of love. So I think it's a very interesting balance between how much do we actually, I was speaking to that with a friend recently, calibrate to ourselves, or how much do we calibrate to others? How much do we want others to like us and calibrate to how they're reacting to our actions and make our own individual well-being dependent on their reaction? Or how much can we actually be sovereign beings? And for me, it's really this answer that we need to fully, as you just shared, be self-reliant, be able to take responsibility for ourselves fully without needing others to make us happy. And at the same time, where I feel that we need community is to have these mirrors, these sacred mirrors that show us when we're falling out of love, when we're falling into trauma responses, and when we're not embodying our high selves, and that we have enough trust in the community to actually listen to each other if we receive that feedback. So I think that's an interesting balance between individualism and collectivism, to really find like, oh, this is what I'm responsible for, and this is what I need the community for as well. Curious to hear your thoughts on that, and then we can also open it up to other questions from the people here on the call.
Yeah, I love the way you dropped it into sovereignty, and I figure we can't really complete the gist without talking about what's the objective. And so we didn't start with this word community. It is a very broad and like extensive word. Like community can mean all kinds of things. Community can use like a subdivision. Conversations, what a community is the governance factor of human beings. Like, how are we going to govern our collective, either it be a neighborhood or a bunch of people living together? What is that system that creates structure within it? And through this journey, I am seeing in most all senses that there's a lack in their faith. our families. Am I still there? Yeah, okay. And so in order to take that into account and also realize that in permaculture, what we're trying to do is sustainable culture. So the community on that level is the culture of how we're going to be permaculture all together as a collective. So the only thing that matters in there is sovereignty. And that's why I liked where you went. It's the idea that the only types of communities that have sustained thousands of years have been communities of sovereign families, where each family in their own, what they call kin's domain, have created a sustainable water, air, food, love, and shelter. And from that container, they leave it in abundance, which means when they make friendships or do anything else, it isn't from a lack. It's always from a full place of being. And for that reason, where we find ourselves now in the journey of nomadic community, and even this conversation is, can we believe in our ability to be sovereign? Like, can we see that picture? Can we see that picture of emotional sovereignty and physical sovereignty and spiritual sovereignty? Or is it such a gap that it seems impossible? Because for me, it was so big that I was like, that's a huge objective. Like, I feel so tiny compared to that objective of being full in myself. And that's how nomadic community was formed. It's like, well, why don't we make a step, a halfway point that brings in the values that are in my best interest, and that bring those awarenesses and abilities to me, but don't require me to jump all the way to this place that feels unattainable. And so in this whole journey to community, I implore people to really think about what is it they're saying, what's their objective when they say community, and ask themselves whether it's an effort to fulfill something inside of them, or they're wondering how they can create a system that's going to preserve the earth for the intention of not destroying it. Those are two separate things. And neither one are wrong. And I think this is one of the biggest things I found on this journey. There are no intrinsically like right or wrong things to do. We're all just in this like soup mixed together, and that's the essence of love as well. Is the more that we just are love and experience love and share love, actually the more quickly this process of coming to sustainability will happen. And those things seem like two opposite subjects. Like, yeah, we're talking permaculture and sustainability. Now he's getting all love and hippie on me, but that's really where it's at. Is the comprehension, experience, and sharing of love leads to one being able to feel sovereign, and ultimately leads to a sovereign and permaculture culture, like world society. Yeah, I got real big on that one.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting kind of point to open up to the group, is like, what is your motivation, everybody, for wanting to be in community or to be interested in community? And I also wanted to weave back in, I think you opened like a big topic that we kind of quickly jumped over, but like the theme of like sexuality within community as well, and how that plays out, because it's always there, right? And it's one of the topics that oftentimes we kind of try and keep in a closet, but it's such a base human motivating factor, you know? So I'd love for people to also kind of explore that theme as you feel comfortable or see fit. So I'll hand it over to the group. You guys can share reflections, you can share other questions, whatever feels right for you. You're sovereign beings.
Well, I want to just, yeah, say thank you for holding the space, and Ticon for uh, Ticon for showing up and sharing your experience. You know, we're all just in the middle of our rivers. Um, I had a lot of reflections come up. This is a topic I've got a few blogs kind of half made about that I'm working on, and today's conversation has contributed another piece. And anyhow, I'll share kind of what I was noting here as I was taking all this in and processing it. You know, for me, the sexuality piece and stuff isn't something really necessarily on my radar, but the bigger picture is it's really, and even like what I'm looking for in community isn't necessarily where I'm at right now. You know, I'm happily taking a break from that, from being identified with having my personal self identity being attached to a particular piece of land or a project or a group of people. Like the sovereign space that I've been enjoying this last year has been nourishing and reflective. So I'm going to just read kind of what I wrote here. The phenomenon of intentional communities, as I see it, it came together as a response originally, as we see it, as we're talking about it. Although there's the kibbutzes, which really, you know, were another response to a similar thing, which is this counterculture wanting to create bubbles of isolation to create a lifestyle independent of the degenerative society they found around them. Right? This is largely why we say we want to live in a community, is because we experience a society. We want to create a new bubble that looks differently with other people that want to create that bubble with us, right? And so the intentional community things got, you know, half a century of uh, evolution since it became a thing with a name like that. And the idea of eco villages has expanded on that, looking beyond people's residential needs and to build a larger scale societal infrastructure. And it still has this boundary though of like, this is our eco village and that's the rest of the non-eco world or something, you know. And but it's a swing of this pendulum from like, oh, we're all participating in this degenerative society, to we want a bubble, to wait a minute, we need more than a bubble, we need to expand. And you know, right now I feel like we're all in the middle of our river. I feel like this movement is in the middle of its own evolution, and the pendulum really for me, I'm like trying to momentum toward building is really has its own, you know, environmental influences. But once we had mass transportation and people being able to move around and trade and this kind of thing, villages became the thing. And it wasn't an, I don't know, going off topic more, but as these projects become more concentrated in particular regions like the Diamante Valley, or up here in Chiripo or many other places around Costa Rica, you know, they're happening in places that are already populated with people who've been there for generations and who come from a different culture and belief system. And one thing that I feel is just absolutely critical right now is that we consciously take this opportunity to explore these new edges and build these bridges and establish absolutely unrealized levels of resilience. So, and that comes with an openness and a synergy, in a cooperation with people we don't know how to cooperate with yet in on large levels. You know, I say we as in like the societal we. So that's I feel like what really the work toward having this desire, like you're saying, like, and we've got people come looking for community because they've seen a mural, they've painted a mural for themselves as to like what community is supposed to look like. And as people go through this hero's journey, oftentimes many of us who've gone through our seasons, we come to find that, you know, what we thought we set out looking for wasn't the thing that's actually going to bring us the fulfillment we're looking for. And you know, it is, I think we're all along that journey. And another reflection that I want to throw, and that wasn't nothing for to resolve anything, is just to like really keep the wider perspective of how this cultural desire that many of us progressive people are here looking for, this sense of community, that really encouraging us to open it up and not be so rigid as to how that can play out, and to push ourselves beyond our comfort zones, you know, to be willing to get uncomfortable and to grow and to experiment with these challenges that we see in front of us, and really be the catalysts for the solutions by making that effort. I guess the last thing I want to say is housing. When we talk about the nomadic community, housing is really one of the biggest challenges of this phenomenon of nomadic community enthusiasm, is that, you know, these seasonal fluctuations, they make a really significant impact on the population, both economically and emotionally. And again, the best way to mitigate this impact, I feel, is by getting the cooperation of all the residents and the visitors to band together for to come up with co-beneficial solutions. And these conversations, they need to be facilitated, they need to be stimulated, they need to, like, you know, really be activated, and they need to be done in a format that builds trust. Something I'm working on right now is we had at our last at the event I did, we had a group discussion about cultural bridging as a remedy for neocolonialism, and I just posted that on my YouTube. I haven't promoted it very much yet, but I'm planning a follow-up conversation, a public town hall or whatever, and I'm trying to find a sponsor to pay for the bilingual translation of the captions, so that we can have a bilingual conversation about cultural bridging as a remedy for neocolonialism, because the neocolonialism isn't about any fault of a person. It's a lack of understanding and communication, I feel. And so I'm remedying by creating, you know, hopefully a series of these conversations, and hopefully facilitating solutions in that direction. But anyhow, yeah, that's my share on all of that. Thank you so much for stimulating that, and helping pull that out of me, and being the people that are really doing the work.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jason, and thank you for the beautiful work that you're doing. One of the words that stuck when you were speaking was resilience, that we need to build more resilience. And what came right to me was abundance. And somehow I feel this year, 2023, will be a year where we'll discover a whole new relationship to abundance. For me, it was in nature that I experienced how abundant nature actually is, and how the systems that many of us have been growing up in just promote a mindset of scarcity so much. And so I think one of the most beautiful things that we can do in these communities is really to tune into the frequency of abundance, and how we can create that, and to make life in communities so much more attractive by making it more beautiful, by making it more abundant in all areas of life, in terms of resources, in terms of connection, in terms of sexuality, in terms of beauty, you know, bringing abundance into our lives and aligning with that frequency. So I think what you spoke about, you know, creating that resilience also for me is creating that abundance, so that we don't need to limit ourselves. And I think this is why these pockets of society where we experiment with new ways of being in community can be such beautiful models that offer alternatives for society as well. And we're almost approaching the end of the call, but I want to open up if anyone else has a voice to share and hasn't spoken yet, to also presence yourself with what's alive for you. So Maria, Gigi, Stefan, if you want to share something, feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, hello. I'm Gigi, so apologies for coming on the call a little bit later. I'm actually in London at the moment. I was in Costa Rica until September. Then total different jump of realities here in London, as you can imagine. Returning to Costa Rica in a month. And it's very interesting how, I don't know, being on this other side, in inverted commas, of the system and of the world outside the bubbles of the community, keep switching between one reality and the other. One observes how the blessing of the community swings both ways because I've listened a lot to the world, to the word leader within a community, and I'm just asked, how about the word facilitator, as in each and one of the person taking on the responsibility of being a facilitator in the co-creation of the system within the community. And that's just an open question to all of you.
I think it comes down to the scope of what you're talking about in each point. When you have people who've committed to a common objective, they come in as co-creators. When you have somebody who maybe holds a space so others can come in to use it to experience, then there's also leaders. Because in order for the space to like maintain itself, somebody has to take the responsibility to make it happen. And the common factor for most everyone is survival. And going from that other place to here, it's like this refresher, like Jonathan said, that actually the world's abundant. It's a whole different radical way to think. And so in order to make even a system, like even here at any place that we take nomadic community, it takes a group of people to have intrinsically abundance as their motivating factor and to also believe in it, like in their heart space. And then they can co-create anything together. But it also relies, like if we're talking back to like physical reality, there are binding factors, like this house has to have a water bill and an electric bill, and if there's not, then the house doesn't have the thing to hold the energy. So somebody ultimately is also taking responsibility and leading a piece of it, not necessarily being the leader in everything, but the piece that they can, they take it and they lead it, and they're just taking that on in a way that if they can't do it, they're going to be responsible to make sure it gets done so that others have the chance to come and co-create something else in the space. And so when we're getting on to like form a whole community together, I tell people, like, if you wanted to make a community with somebody, that you probably would want to talk to them for like 2, 3, 4, 5 years to really plan it out. And they'd be talking like 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, because there's literally so many details to go through and to create energetic harmony. Because like Jason said, it'd be really nice if we got all the neighbors and talk to them and bridge the energy, which I think is awesome. But based on my experience, even getting a small group of people who like each other together and getting them to agree on something is actually really difficult.
And even to 2 people sometimes.
Exactly. So I really respect what Jason said. I believe that I've encouraged too that if we view feelings as not a negative experience, but a positive experience, if we can switch that to say that every time that I have emotions, that it's actually an opportunity for my transformation, then that's going to spark the biggest amount of transformation for me and in general. Because when we believe that it's bad, when we believe that it's bad if we make anybody else feel anything, we're taking responsibility for their cultural and family story, and then taking it onto ourselves. And then ultimately, that doesn't bring a reflection to them, like Jonathan was saying, so that they can see the truth of their nature. And I'm hoping most of the people on this call have had experiences that glimpse deeper into the truth of their identity. And once you see that deep, then it's hard to define those boundaries of me and you and all the things that are normal in our culture today. I hope that answers that.
Beautiful.
Especially well, when it comes to you just also touched on a word that is one of my favorite, which is like harmony. I mean, I lived in a community in Italy for 2.5 years, and it was a 10 years project, and that was the hardest thing to achieve, that harmony, putting 25 heads together. It is hard, but then you also have the consciousness and the willingness and the openness to be there and to be absolutely transparent with your both vulnerability and integrity when you walk into something like that, which is one of the most difficult things to do in life. I mean, the experience of living in a community, everybody thinks, oh yes, we're all there doing nothing, woo-hoo, and no, it is actually a big commitment and a big chunk of compromise that comes from lowering each other ego and then working for, you know, the one objective or two or three objective, depending on how many objectives, you know, this particular space, physical as in the community, but also the particular space within each and one of the participants of the community lives in. And that is a luxury in a way, because the people who are at this very moment at Liverpool Street Station, which is a horror movie, you know, at rush hour, cannot have. But then it also has to be taken seriously. And then seriously, I don't mean it in a stern way, but more, well, consciously, you know, with great conscience about what each and one of us contributing to the community can bring, can share, and can live. That's it. I'm not taking any more time.
Thank you, Gigi. Beautiful reflections. Maria, is there anything you would want to add to the conversation before we're wrapping it up?
Hey, thank you. Not so much, actually. I'm very overwhelmed, to be honest, by the high quality and high frequencies of those conversations. I resonate a lot. I'm just not simply used to it anymore, as I'm not surrounded by so many or at all like-minded people here right now. I'm a little bit on a different mission at the moment, but I feel very charged and very inspired, and I thank you very much for all those deep, considered, like heart-centered inspirations to think about and to reflect on, like also to look at, yeah, I mean, is there like the motivation coming from some parts in myself that have been rooted in lack and wounds, that I really aim and dream about living in a community one day and have family if I'm not going to build just my own little family. And it's just nice to be aware about it, and I thank you for that. And I really resonate a lot with what Ticon said, that when we welcome all the feelings, just as a gift, just as an opportunity to learn and not judge them anymore. I'm like in a deep, very like self-reflective process at the moment, that I want to just release all the judgments. And this is like, for me, the most beautiful development, to just take in, accept, and just see everything as a gift and see abundance in everything, like you said, you know, like everything that's surrounding me. Maybe it's not what I'm aiming for in my future, what I'm having here, but I am surrounded by abundance. And to be able to already see what's there and to build up from that, and like to share that with others, you know, to share those perspectives of abundance with other people who can't see, who can't take on that perspective because they are wounded or hurt or depressed or whatever. And I feel like I'm doing my work here for myself and for others, for you. But seeing you all there in the dense nature, I'm really missing Costa Rica. I'm thinking of it every day, and I'm pretty sure I'm coming back. I mean, I know you're in Guatemala, but just like back to, yeah, Mama Nature. I've been living in the hill tribe communities of northern Thailand for a little bit, for a year and a half. And I learned from those communities, and I realized that they didn't even have time to worry too much about keeping harmony or like all these little psychological processes that probably nowadays conscious people would go through and supervise, because they were so busy with surviving and maintaining their self-sustainable village life there, that they were just like working together in synchronicity, like so well. Everything was just so obvious what's there to do. Like there weren't many conversations about every day about like, you do this, you facilitate, you lead, blah blah blah. Everything was just so clear, and they worked together as a tribe and just helped each other with joy where they could. And I felt super inspired by that. And this was kind of the moment for me when I realized, yeah, one day I would love to live in a village like that with like-minded people and yeah, other tribes around, you know, ideally, just to share and grow on that, and like to really take care of the essential things, like the simplicity, you know, like you said, what was it, waffle? I love that. You know, to really focus on the minimalism again, on the really important things, and then of course like the self-development process as the main focus for oneself. So yeah, I really resonate with everything you guys said and shared. Thank you for that.
Beautiful. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that example from the hill tribe of really having this shared purpose, you know, that even though it's still focused on survival, it brings people together and allows people to also transcend their own individual egos. And I feel what we're striving towards is also this synthesis where this individual freedom and this larger shared purpose isn't so much based on, or isn't so much limited by scarcity, but really moving into that abundance that allows for that expression of individuality. And Ticon, you mentioned it so beautifully, you know, how this magic kicks in once we have that sovereign individual grounding, have that connection with others, and then these synchronicities start happening. So I'm excited walking towards that path and grateful to have you as allies by my side. Alexandra, anything else you want to add before we close to officially wrap it up?
No, I think like at the end of these, I always feel really nourished, and we touch on really the deeper levels of what's going on in these spaces. And I think Maria, you just opened this whole other deeper level for me, where it's like, how do we really, yeah, become like the hive and still be the bee, you know? So I think there's always more to explore, and I look forward to future conversations with you all.
Ticon, thank you so much for joining us as this session's expert. I'll give it to you for any last words that you want to share with us, or anything also that, you know, how can we find more about your work, anything that you want to share that we can connect with you?
Yeah, you can check out our website at nomadicommunities.com. Instagram is nomadic_communities. And yeah, if I was gonna leave anything, and how I always like to leave things, is just with this encouragement to uncover what love is inside of your heart. If they're gonna do anything, like the solution to it all, it literally is simple. It's like love. And it gets real deep and complicated, but ultimately it's just really checking in with yourself. Checking with yourself in a way that maybe you've never done before, really listening to the subtle feelings, not necessarily the thoughts, the subtle feelings that are guiding you to a more fulfilled life. And for me, what I found is, you know, the community aspect isn't nearly as important to me as like living in community. Like, especially being nomadic now, I get those little gists of reflections and mirrors, which make it quite nice. What my real objective in the nomadic community is to create spaces that allow people to experience the depth of their being. And those gardens to change all the systems of the world, to bring our whole world into a more sustainable reality. And all that we have to do is listen to us. And that's my encouragement.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ticon.
Beautiful. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
I look
you.
forward to deepening the conversation
you,
with you next
Jonah.
month.
Thank you,
All the best to
Ticon.
you.
Looking forward to
Ciao.
the next.
Yay.
Mhm.